Is Henry Cejudo a fraud? Given that he's fighting Aljamain Sterling in just a few days, you've probably already heard the term combat sports greatest athlete thrown around 100 quadrillion times. We all know this man is an Olympic gold medalist, and that's something you couldn't possibly take away from him. In terms of his accolades, the man is stacked to the gills. That being said, a lot of people are talking about this guy like he's, again, the greatest combat sports athlete to ever do it. And if he gets a win this weekend against Aljamain Funkmaster Sterling, that he would be a top 3 GOAT in MMA, or at least right up there with guys like GSP and John Jones. Now, while I agree that Henry Cejudo is one of the all-time greats, I personally have him at number 7 on my GOAT list. I can't help but think that part of his legacy is a little bit fishy. And when I say it's fishy, I'm talking about almost kind of fraudy. To be brought up with these guys like John Jones, who has 14 title fight wins, to be brought up with a guy like George St. Pierre, who defended his belt 10 times, or people like Anderson. I mean, these guys seemed like they were on top for decades, and Henry Cejudo only has 4 title wins. I can't help but think that if Henry Cejudo were to not have a gold medal, he wouldn't be ranked so highly on the all-time GOAT list. Now, he is a 2-division champion and held 2 belts at the same time, but it's not like there are no other 2-division champions that have been in the UFC too. Daniel Cormier not only had more title wins than Henry Cejudo overall, but also was a simultaneous 2-division champion that defended both belts, just like Cejudo. And aside from that, Demetrious Johnson should without a doubt be put higher up all time than Henry Cejudo. Not only does he have 12 title wins in the UFC, but he's also a current sitting champion at 135 pounds in ONE FC, which is bar none the second best MMA promotion in the world, especially when it comes to lighter weight classes. And Demetrious Johnson is 1-1 with Cejudo. He knocked Cejudo out. So I'm just saying, at the end of the day, if Cejudo wins this weekend, how are you going to compare his legacy to a guy with 12 title wins who's 1-1 with him, who's also a champion in a upper weight class as well, in a really good promotion right now? I do have to say, a lot of his title wins, which there's only 4, have asterisks. They are a little bit questionable. And that's what I'm here to discuss today. Why do some people think that Henry Cejudo has a bit of a fishy legacy? And after that, I'm going to discuss how Aljamain Sterling, Henry Cejudo's opponent, might have the flukiest championship run in UFC history. That's right, Aljamain Sterling is supposed to be defending his belt for the 3rd time this weekend against Henry Cejudo, but in reality, he only has 1 legit title win. So let's just get right into it. Why do some people think that Henry Cejudo's legacy is a bit fishy? The one thing that really put Henry on everyone else's radar was his win over Demetrious Johnson, his first ever title win. Now, Demetrious Johnson is the consensus flyweight greatest fighter to ever do it in MMA. So getting a win over that guy on paper looks incredible for your legacy. The thing is though, the fight could have actually gone to Demetrious Johnson. Some people had him winning. Some people even say that this was a robbery. And based on damage, Demetrious Johnson should be the winner. There are rounds that are not necessarily clear, and the only clear Henry Cejudo rounds are the 2nd and the 5th, which just makes you think, wait a second, like, your most convincing argument for the GOAT list is a questionable win? Yes, Demetrious Johnson looked untouchable at the time, and at the end of the day, it was a brilliant performance from Henry Cejudo, a very high IQ fight, but we have to mention that. It's the next fight that has the biggest asterisk for me. It's when he fought TJ Dillashaw, who was the current sitting bantamweight champion at the time, and the UFC wanted to get rid of the flyweight division. There wasn't really a market for it. People weren't interested in the flyweight fights, and TJ Dillashaw was supposed to go in there and beat Henry Cejudo to completely shut down the flyweight division. Now, keep in mind, TJ Dillashaw was shredded when he would cut down to 135 pounds, and this time he was going to be cutting down to 125, which resulted in one of the most horrific weight cuts in UFC history, where TJ basically looked like a dead man walking in the lead up to that fight. I mean, the guy was completely emaciated. It's as if he had spent a whole year in a desert, not drinking, not eating. He was definitely the weakest version of himself you could possibly bring into the cage to fight a fully locked and loaded Henry Cejudo, who is coming off of a milestone win over Demetrius Johnson. Henry Cejudo knocked him out within the first exchange. Within the first 20 seconds of the fight, the first punch that he landed on TJ rocked TJ, who had like basically no fluid in his brain. That's what happens when you cut weight. It's easy to get hurt. It's easy to get wobbled. And what do you know? His title defense at flyweight is over an emaciated, weight-drained TJ Dillashaw, who's basically a dead man walking, a zombie on earth. That is a bit of an asterisk. And whenever people talk about TJ Dillashaw, they always mention this fight as being, well, that was a weight-drained TJ, and he should have never been in there that night. This was just a really bad career move. And yes, he was on the sauce, and that's a completely different story. And the fact that he got in the cage on the sauce is terrible. But at the end of the day, if anyone is just talking about TJ, they're always going to say, yeah, that's a little bit of a one-off fight. But if you are talking about Cejudo, people just gloss over that and say, well, then he got the win over TJ. But it's like, which one is it? Is it a weight-drained TJ that shouldn't have been in there that night? Or is it just a really good win for Henry Cejudo? I think it's a weight-drained TJ. So that is an asterisk. Then Henry Cejudo moves up to the bantamweight division, and he is booked to fight Marlon Moraes, who was an absolute monster on the time. He was coming off of a finishing win over Jimmy Rivera and a knockout over the current reigning champion, Aljamain Sterling. And so this looked like a world beater, and Henry Cejudo was getting doubted. And what do you know, in the first round, Henry Cejudo gets his ass kicked. He gets his legs torn to shreds, and he makes an adjustment in the second round to bite down on his mouthpiece, to move forward and to brawl with the powerful Marlon Moraes, who was rocking him in that round too, but Henry Cejudo prevailed, continued to march forward, and he eventually got the better of Marlon Moraes. In the third round, he dominated Marlon from pillar to post, ended up finishing Marlon to become the undisputed bantamweight champion while still holding the flyweight title. So now this man is a double champ. And on his legacy, he's already beaten Mighty Mouse, he's already beaten TJ Dillashaw, that was a former champion, and he just beat Marlon Moraes to become a double champion. Everything looks great. The thing about Marlon is, since then, he went on a massive loss skid, getting knocked out 5 times in the UFC, then moving to the PFL to fight lower levels of competition and getting finished there too. Another important thing to note is that Marlon Moraes, in the fights that happened after Cejudo, proved that he had no gas tank. His Achilles heel was not only his chin, but also the fact that he couldn't continue to fight at his best past the first round, that he would always gas out. And if you look at that win on paper, it's not that great. You know, there are lots of other champions on the GOAT list that have better wins than Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes is not going to be seen as a guy that is a top 100 UFC fighter of all time. And this is the guy that Henry Cejudo moved up to fight. Now, again, it was a tough matchup at the time, but the win didn't age well. It's his next fight that really makes Henry Cejudo's legacy questionable to me. Henry Cejudo was booked to fight Jose Aldo a year later on UFC 249, the card in which Tony Ferguson headlined, fighting Justin Gaethje. Aldo pulls out a couple weeks before the fight, and in steps Dominick Cruz. The thing is, though, he was past his prime, he had been out of the cage for years, he was coming up off the couch, and the biggest asterisk, in my personal opinion, that I don't see a lot of people mentioning is that Dominick Cruz is the least dangerous fighter you could possibly put in a bantamweight title fight. He has pillow hands, he has absolutely no ability to finish you, and in the modern day bantamweight division, in order to actually be a serious threat in that division, you have to be able to finish fights. Again, not only did he have no ability to finish you, but he was past his prime. And it's like, yeah, Henry Cejudo finished that guy in Dominick Cruz, but it'd be a shame not to. And yes, Dominick Cruz is considered by many to be the bantamweight GOAT. If you take an out of prime guy that didn't have ability to finish guys in his prime, without a submission game, without any knockout power, and you put him in a bantamweight title fight in the modern era, he's going to get destroyed every time. That's just the facts. So Henry's wins on paper look amazing. You beat the Bantamweight GOAT, you beat the Flyweight GOAT, you beat TJ Dillashaw, and you beat Marlon Moraes, but Marlon Moraes is not a top 100 fighter, not even close, maybe not even a top 200 all-time fighter. The Mighty Mouse win was questionable. He arguably lost that fight. It's a little bit fishy. 4 title wins. And the only reason why I say he's a little bit overhyped in regards to his legacy is because he's being compared to guys like John Jones that has beaten so many former champions, and guys like Anderson Silva that was on top for 5+ years, or a GSP that had defended his belt 10 times. It just doesn't really seem to make sense. And there are other people that are just as worthy of being in the same spot on the GOAT list as Henry Cejudo. I don't think Henry Cejudo's a top 5 GOAT. If he beats Aljamain Sterling, maybe I could move him into the number 5 spot. But until then, he's going to be at number 7 for me. And now, Aljamain Sterling, it's time to bring this man into the conversation, the flukiest champion in UFC history. Now, we all respect Aljamain Sterling's skills as a contender. He had plenty of good wins, even wins where he was outstriking guys on the feet like Pedro Munoz and Jimmy Rivera, and then he goes out there and chokes out Corey Sandhagen in 1 round to get a title shot against Petr Yan, who had just beat Jose Aldo. This was an amazing fight. It was competitive in the early rounds, and Petr Yan started to get the better of Aljamain Sterling in the 3rd, and in the 4th round, he looked like he was on his way to a finish. He was bullying Aljamain Sterling, and then he throws an illegal knee, and this is probably the biggest mistake in modern day UFC history because that knee completely fucked up Petr Yan's career. Aljamain Sterling was able to win a fight basically by getting knocked out. And I'm not here to talk about whether or not Aljamain Sterling was in the right to continue that fight or opt out of continuing that fight, but at the end of the day, it's a fishy, fluky way to win the belt. He then goes on to have a rematch with Petr Yan. He wins the belt. It's a clear win in my opinion. Some people to this day say that Yan was robbed, but at the end of the day, Aljamain Sterling clearly won the 1st round in my opinion. He outstruck Yan by like 7 strikes and then won the 2nd and the 3rd round via domination on the ground. So he actually redeemed himself. A lot of people were saying Petr Yan was going to absolutely bully him going into that rematch, and that just wasn't the case. So he really stepped his game up, and he proved that he deserved to be a champion, because we can all agree that, listen, you finally beat Petr Yan, who was a legit champion, who was also at the time coming off of a win over Corey Sandhagen. That's a real win. But on paper, that's considered a title defense. So Aljamain Sterling defends his belt against Petr Yan, which is complete bullshit. It wasn't really a title defense. We all know that that was his first title win. And his real title defense, which was the fight after Petr Yan, was against TJ Dillashaw. Remember the guy that got KO'd by Henry Cejudo? Well, he took a few years off, came back to fight Corey Sandhagen, got his ass kicked in that fight, got completely fucked up and injured, and somehow won, but everyone in the MMA community agrees that that was a robbery. He then takes another year off, getting just older and older. Old man TJ Dillashaw comes back to fight Aljamain Sterling and dislocates his arm in the first exchange, and the fight resorts to Aljamain Sterling beating up a one-armed, defenseless man. It's basically seeing like an old man knocking his cane away and then shooting a blast double leg takedown and trying to beat him in an MMA fight. It just wasn't really a real contest. And it's not Aljamain Sterling's fault that TJ Dillashaw showed up severely compromised and injured, because he even said in an interview after that fight that his arm had dislocated in training like 100 times. So your shoulder pops out, and you're then fighting Aljamain Sterling, who is a legit champion. There's no way you're going to win. And that's booked as Aljo's 2nd title defense. So on paper, this man has 2 title defenses, even though he only has 1 real championship win. I get it. People are going to say he beat TJ Dillashaw 100 years from now. But at the end of the day, he didn't really get a real win there. TJ was a defenseless, one-armed man. And I picked Aljamain Sterling to win that fight too. But there's no other way about it. So I can't help but feel bad for Aljo, because he's really goddamn skilled. And we saw that. We saw he was able to make some adjustments and come back better against Petr Yan the 2nd time to beat him with skill, with putting more points on the board, with a really good style and economic approach. And we've seen how he's able to go out there and finish high-level fighters like Corey Sandhagen before he ever fought for the belt the first time. And we know with Henry Cejudo that he is one of the greatest fighters to ever do it. But I do understand why fans are calling this a little bit of a fishy matchup. You know, the Fluke Master is what people are calling Aljamain Sterling, and people are starting to say that Triple C is a little bit overhyped. Now, what's my personal opinion? I do understand that there are some asterisks on both of these men's records, but at the end of the day, I do believe that this is one of the most competitive and compelling matchups that the UFC is putting on between Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo. I do think that Henry Cejudo is one of the most impressive combat sports athletes to ever do it. Do I think he's like a top 3, top 4 greatest MMA fighter ever? No, but I have him at 7. And the fact that he's that high is a testament to how respected he is. And as far as Aljamain Sterling, I'm actually picking Aljamain Sterling to beat Henry Cejudo this weekend. But even I can't deny that it's a tough matchup for both men. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. May the best man win.
Everyone thinks it's hard to get lean. Oh, it's too difficult. I'm too lazy to eat well. In reality, that's just a big fat excuse. You just don't know how to cook. And if you know how to make healthy food taste good, it's 100 times easier to stick to your diet. Today, I'm gonna show you guys how to make a classic comfort food with whole and unprocessed ingredients. Let's make some chocolate ice cream.
We're gonna get it cracking with some whole milk and some full fat yogurt. I'm using the rawest form of chocolate today, so I'm adding cacao powder, and to sweeten it up, a half a cup of raw honey. Now that's 4 ingredients. I'm gonna blend that up. Now I'm gonna pour it into my ice cream machine. We're gonna leave this on for 25 minutes. Super easy. I'm adding a little bit of frozen chopped cherries to add some fruit. And look at that refreshing, healthy ice cream. Only 5 goddamn ingredients. For more recipes like this, comfort foods made with whole and unprocessed ingredients, check out my real food cookbook. The link is in my description. Use code MMA for 30% off.